From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Microsoft says early June service outages were cyber attacks. The third Moveat vulnerability raises alarms as the U.S. Agriculture Department says it may be impacted, and Reddit is hit with a ransom demand. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and expertise on these stories and more from our guest, Janet Heins, the CISO at iHeartMedia. Janet, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me. And I want to give a shout out. Happy International Women in Engineering Day to everyone.
Yes, yes, from all of us here at the CISO series for sure. Thank you, Janet, for wishing that to our audience. We also want to thank our sponsor for today, Wing Security. Don't be left in the dark. Join us. Remember, you can do so on YouTube Live for the live stream. Get in on the conversation. Leave some comments. We want the participation. If you need to know how, you go to CISOseries.com, hit the events drop down, and look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. And if you're not into the whole reading thing, it's the third one down. Just click on it to join us. We've got about 20 minutes, so let's jump to it. First up here, Microsoft says early June service outages were, in fact, cyber attacks. Microsoft said last Friday that the outages that impacted some of its services in early June were the result of cyber attacks, but said it saw no evidence of any customer data being accessed or compromised. It has begun tracking DDoS activity conducted by a threat actor it refers to as Storm 1359, but has not confirmed whether they had identified the party responsible for the attack. So, Jan, the technique used is what is called a slow loris, which essentially just slows down a download, forcing the server connection to stay open longer. You can see where the difficulty would lie there. There have been some suggestions that this might be an attack from Anonymous Sudan, which is making a little bit of a name for itself these days. Clearly, Microsoft is a high profile target for publicity hungry threat groups, but do you think it might be an awfully big bear to poke?
Well, I think Microsoft and the other giants are really used to it by now, right? I mean, they are targets. I think these threat actors that go after them, in some cases are looking for some of that notability and attention, if you will.
Mhm.
DDoS attacks are certainly not new. And Microsoft themselves, talked about how they needed to continuously tune their WAF to better protect themselves against these attacks in the future. So, a reminder to all of us to do this continuous kind of checking on everything. You don't just set it and forget it. But it's a good eye opener for all of us when you see big giant companies like this getting attacked.
Yeah, anytime you see a service like Azure or Outlook or something like that, and it actually impacts availability in a very
Mhm.
real sense, that to me is always okay. That's a significant moment. All right, next here, third Moveat vulnerability raises more alarms. This third vulnerability is causing alarm among U.S. officials and cybersecurity researchers after it was revealed that several government agencies were impacted by a hack exploiting the first bug. New additions to the growing list of victims are the U.S. Departments of Agriculture and Energy. It's always difficult to assess the scope of the damage these attacks can cause, but it appears to be penetrating deep into the infrastructure of the U.S. and other countries around the world. Janet, what are your thoughts about not only this move at issue, but also around the potential for others?
Well, I think for the Move It issue specifically, I think it's going to trigger a lot of self-reporting, right? Notices that companies are going to be required to provide both to government and to the actual, their customers, consumers. And I think that's going to be much larger than it's been in the past, especially when it's issues like Move It, where it's a very broadly used piece of software that a
Mhm.
lot of companies have in place, right? And again, I'm just bring up it's another kind of painful reminder that without the foundational uh, security processes in place, in this case, patching, right? You fall victim to these kind of things. And specific to patching, I think that the patching process, I think what's critical is to have something in place, a process in place for 0 days, right? Because they're going to happen, and you do kind of have to call all hands on deck and get going on it, right? And get it patched.
Have you seen personally like we can cover like there's been X amount more 0 days, whether those are things that are directly going to impact your organization. Have you personally seen like a kind of an increased call to address these from your experience?
You mean just in where I've
Just in terms
worked
of
or
zero,
where?
like in terms of 0 days that 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 you've seen in kind of day to day that you've had to deal with. I'm just like anecdotally, I guess, just off the top of your head, does it seem like there is more that are these kind of critical? Hey, we got to hit the boots on the ground with these.
I don't know if there's more. I just think that it's really critical to have a process set up that you can jump into and know. So along with what we do in security with incident response and we do tabletops, right? I think because of how the impact these 0 days can have, it's good to kind of exercise around that, right? So that when they do hit, you're ready for them.
Absolutely. All right, next up here, Reddit hit with a ransom demand. Recently, Reddit has been getting some pushback over its controversial API pricing changes. You may have heard about it if you've checked any tech sites, I guess, in the past 2 weeks. Now it's also facing threats of a data leak, specifically 80 gigabytes of data that the group Alpha V claims to have exfiltrated. Reddit has acknowledged the theft and that the group is demanding a reversal to its API pricing changes, as well as going along with over a $4 million ransom. So, Janet, Reddit, another high profile target, makes it likely the path of that 80 gigabytes of data wasn't just dumb luck. I'm curious, where do your instincts, your CISO finely honed instincts, tell you that there might be the smoking gun, where it's at?
Yeah, I mean, a couple interesting points about this situation, right? The data was stolen back in February.
Hmm.
And I believe they made their first request shortly after that. And then their latest one now incorporates the change that they made to their API policy.
Yeah.
So I think that I just find that fascinating that they're modifying their request based
I-
on.
Is that like a Robin Hood kind of thing? Like they're like, we can get ahead of the optics on this for once, and maybe that gives us a better chance of getting our ransom?
I don't know. I don't know. It's just an interesting tactic, I guess, is what I'm raising it for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I do
absolutely.
believe that, from what I read, it was a very highly targeted. I'm quoting because that's what they
Hmm.
said. It was a highly targeted phishing attack, right? And so many of I don't know Reddit's security posture, but assuming they are pretty good and they've got MFA everywhere, very likely if it was a targeted phishing attack that was highly targeted, to quote them, there was probably some intel that they had, the threat actors had, that they could use to really just seem very legitimate. And those types of things usually come from, and I'm not saying this is the case here, just to be clear, but those types of cases come from, business email compromise, right? So a
Hmm.
third party that they use that maybe isn't so secure, as having conversations over email with the company, and they're being watched, they're being seen, and then they're used against them to trick them.
All right, well, that definitely plays into our next story here because Mondelez International info compromised in a third party breach. Yes, the producer of Oreo cookies and Ritz crackers, among many other debatably delectable snack foods, has warned 51,000 of its past and present employees that their detailed personal information was stolen from the company's third party law firm. Mondelez was among the global companies hit with the NotPetya outbreak and recently settled a $100 million plus cleanup bill with its cyber insurer, Zurich American Insurance Company. This is not the first story we've seen where a company's law firm becomes the target for valuable data. In fact, we're seeing that in Australia right now, impacting a whole bunch of organizations. I'm curious, though, Janet, in your experience, do companies need to do more to assess their potential weaknesses, the potential weakness of the companies to firms in their own supply chain?
Exactly. Yeah. A third party risk is huge, right? And if you don't hold your third parties to the same standards that you have for yourself, your own company, then it's just like not holding your company to the standard, because
Mhm.
you're sharing data, you're connected, they're connected to you, you're connected to them. And in this case, this law firm had a large quantity of data about the company employees, and you've really got to treat it all as the scope is as big as your, to include all of your third parties.
Has the has the focus on third party risk changed recently? Because it seems like this is increasingly what we are reporting on, right? Is that, a third party vendor, third party service, something like that, what was the source of vulnerability to a larger platform? In this case, Mondelez with their law firm or something like that. Is it just a matter of emphasis, or like has the have you seen the way threat actors, I guess, are targeting these third-party organizations? Has that changed?
I think some of the things that have happened that we're seeing more of is the reporting,
Ah,
right?
okay.
So I think the reporting requirements
Mm.
are changing and getting, shorter or just having them at all, depending on what type of data is lost. And I
Mhm.
think that's what's bringing it to light.
Ah.
Certainly contributing, maybe not the whole, maybe not the 100%, but it's certainly contributing to it.
All right, well, before we move on with the news of the week, we have to spend a few moments and give a word to our sponsor, Wing Security. The first step to securing your organization's SaaS usage is knowing which SaaS applications your employees are using, third party included. Wing offers a completely free SaaS shadow IT discovery tool. You can find it at wing.security and self on board. No sales in the process, no credit card needed, no time limit. Just go ahead and discover your SaaS usage at wing.security. All right, cybersecurity market growth outpaces the tech sector. This comes from analysts at Canalys, and they report that the cybersecurity market as a whole grew 12.5% on the year in Q1 to $18.6 billion. Not a bad chunk of change. This comes as many potential clients for cybersecurity continue to cut costs in a tightening economy. We've heard of years of efficiency from some large ones. Spending increased across the board from large companies to micro businesses. So from the biggest of the big to just, like 1 to 9 person companies, seeing it across the board, different scales, but, still growth. So Janet, good news for the cybersecurity profession. Know that business is good and that companies are spending. I'm curious though, do you see this as proactive or reactive spending? And do you see corresponding action from within organizations in terms of proactive security based policies and training?
So I think whether it's proactive or reactive probably depends on where you are in your security journey,
Hmm.
right? So how far along you are. I think that if you're still fighting, to identify, detect and remediate, right? Detect and respond. You're probably going to be a little more reactive. If you've got a more fully baked security program, hopefully you're focusing on proactive. Except in the case of what we talked about earlier with 0 days and that kind of thing, you definitely have to be reactive as possible, not really able to be proactive in that case. So I think it kind of depends on where you are from a maturity perspective and how solid the program is. Those are some astronomical numbers, though, and outpacing the tech sector. In my opinion, means that security investments in security in companies are seeing security as not just a tech problem,
Hmm.
which is incredibly important because it's not, right? It's a risk that the entire company takes on. It's not just in IT. So that to me is a sign of a good, a good movement forward. And I always like to, I mean, I'm not the only one who says this. I hear this from other people, but it's people, process, and technology. So you can invest in all the technology you want, but if you don't have the right processes and you don't have not only the right people, in your security organization, but the rest of the company, right? They're all doing the right things, and you provide awareness training for them and continuous awareness training for them. It takes all three. It takes people, process, and technology.
Yeah, and aligned to the security mission specifically, right? Like I've seen so many like in IT where there is an oppositional relationship for whatever reason, whether it's acquisitions or whatever for whatever reason, corporate culture.
Hmm.
When all three of those are in use and aligned and all kind of working within the scope of the business, yeah, that is the secret sauce for sure. All right, next up here, ChatGPT accounts for sale. Security researchers at Group IB discovered over 100,000 compromised ChatGPT account credentials for sale on illicit forums over the last year. Analysis shows that the Raccoon info stealer accounted for the majority of these stolen credentials, something like 76%. Analysts noted that since ChatGPT retains all conversations by default, you can turn it off, but if you look, they're all there unless you have. These credentials could potentially leak business information or other sensitive data sent to the popular chatbot. ChatGPT seems to have made everyone giddy with the novelty of asking it a question and getting a reply, even if that question might involve trade secrets. It's the magic 8 ball of the internet and potentially leaking information. Even employees whose companies have banned its use will potentially contact friends or associates to get them to do ChatGPT for them, maybe just, use it on their off time with company information. So clearly, human nature once again beats out the best cybersecurity intentions. Janet, I'm curious, what's been your take on kind of seeing ChatGPT as it squirms into the workplace?
So, it's fun, right? You get to put in a prompt and you get to see what the answer is, and it's fun to interact with. But it's not private by default, right?
Mhm.
And your prompt, whatever you type in there, whatever answer it gives you back, and up to where you're located is all things that in addition to probably other things that OpenAI and others like it are tracking, right? And you can turn them off. You can set, there's privacy settings, not very well known, and certainly not, like a pop-up box when you log in. Hey, go check your privacy settings, which maybe they should do that. But they definitely, it's attractive. People are drawn to it, right? Because it's new, it's very high tech. It's kind of like the next, AI is the next thing. So naturally, us humans want to, dive in and see what it's all about. I think the important thing about this story is that this wasn't a breach of OpenAI. As you
Mhm.
read the headline, you kind of have to dig in to see a little bit more about the users were, inadvertently and unknowingly downloaded, software and about, malware, and the logs were stolen, and all that information is contained in the logs. So, well, that's kind of a relief because there's, I don't know, 100 million users of ChatGPT. I'm not sure the number. So this is a small number, if you relatively speaking, but it's scary, right? Because now it's like, oh, this is this new thing that we're playing with, and now there's a breach. So always kind of sets off an alarm. I think people and companies, alike need to just take a look at what their tolerance level is, and understanding that it's fair game. Whatever information gets put out there is fair game, and there's pros and cons to that.
All right. Well, next story here, 63% of IT leaders measure IT success by reduced risk. A survey by Rocket Software reveals that the top concerns among IT leaders modernizing their IT department include improving overall IT performance, data security, process risk and compliance, and the need to improve agility. The top measure of success within their IT organization was by increased efficiency. 71% responded that way, which they defined as faster DevOps and automated process. So, Janet, I guess let's just put this out there. Would you agree that increased efficiency often comes at maybe the price of sufficient defense? I guess, can these two principles happily coexist in your experience?
Yeah, I don't agree. I actually think that automating through, increasing efficiency through automation actually kind of takes the human factor out of it a little bit, right? And they, by having processes in place that are obviously automatically followed, uh, you can build in what you need to build in from a security perspective. So it's more about building in by design, and building security in by design when you develop these automation, right? Develop the automation, but you need to include security. So otherwise, you're kind of back where we were before we had automation. So I think they can coexist. I think, yeah, they can happily coexist.
Well, I mean, that's good for the respondents of these IT leaders that are responding here. So I'm glad to hear that. And our last story here, Icefall vulnerability disclosed affecting Schneider Electric tool. This is following up on a story that we brought to you exactly 1 year ago. So happy anniversary. Researchers have disclosed a vulnerability affecting tools made by OT manufacturer Schneider Electric. The final bug announced as part of a set of disclosures collectively known as OT Icefall that was released on June 22nd, 2022. The vulnerability affects the company's Ion and PowerLogic power meters, which provide power and energy monitoring tools to organizations in the manufacturing, energy, water, and wastewater system sector, aka a whole lot of critical infrastructure. So, Janet, OT breaches always seem to kind of fly under the radar, but this vulnerability had a CVSS score of 8.8 out of 10. That's high severity and allows attackers to gain access to credentials that would help them change configuration settings or potentially modify firmware. I'm curious what your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's kind of frightening when you think about it, right? I mean, it's not talking about, employee records or anything like that, but it's talking about our, major infrastructure in our country and in the world, right? And having
Mhm.
the ability um, to modify configurations and potentially, do harm, right? And uh, affect people's lives, really. And I think that you're right. I don't think that the OT breaches really get the same level of attention until the colonial pipelines, or until
Mhm.
something gets shut down or turns off. And when it comes to companies, we typically look at IT, right, the information technology, not necessarily operational technology. And I like to think of them, especially from a security perspective, that they should be combined, right? A security organization should look at all technology from in a respect of how to secure it.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, Janet, was there any story that you reacted strongly to? Thumbs up or an eye roll, or just a favorite from today?
I think the Microsoft story, the first one we talked about, because, it's a little, humbling, when a company that big has gets taken offline or I didn't really get taken offline, but, have reduced services, whatever you wanna call it. And it's a good lesson for all of us that, even the big companies with, likely some pretty meaty security budgets, have issues. So,
Yeah, the people that are providing all of your security still have issues with this stuff. So, hey,
exactly.
it's not just you. Well, Janet Heins, the CISO at iHeartMedia, thank you so much for being on the show. Truly appreciate it. Just fantastic stuff today. Where can people find you online if they're so inclined to give you a follow? Check what you're working on.
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent, excellent.
Thanks.
So we will have that in the show notes if you want to connect with Janet. Thank you also to our sponsor, Wing Security. Don't be left in the dark. Also, thank you to everyone that was watching on the live stream today. We appreciate everybody. And remember, if you're catching this later in podcast form, just remember, head on over to CISOseries.com, click on the events page. You can sign up to be notified when we're going to be going live and watch the show and leave some comments. We always like to get your feedback. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Week in Review show, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And you Pacific people, you know the math. You're used to it at this point. In the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. That's just about it for us. I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.